Good evening. Welcome to the third Dr. Debangana Desai Endowment Lecture. Dr. Debangana Desai Endowment Program was instituted at the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya, formerly Prince of Wales Museum of Western India, in 2017 by an eminent art historian scholar Dr. Debangana Desai herself. She is also a trustee of the museum. This endowment aims at the propagation of critical art history research and dissemination of study of ancient, medieval, and pre-modern until 19th century art, archaeology, architecture, culture, and history of India. There are three activities slated under the program: annual lecture by a senior scholar, a 3-day biennial art history class, scholarship for junior and senior scholars. The first endowment lecture was delivered by Dr. Nagaswamy in the year 2018 on Kailashnath Temple of Kanchipuram. And the second prestigious Dr. Debangana Desai Endowment Lecture was delivered by Dr. B. N. Goswami in 2019 on works of three generations of artists on the great Rasamanjari series of paintings. And today we are presenting the third annual Dr. Debangana Desai Endowment Lecture by an eminent scholar, art historian, Dr. Ashok Kumar Das. Dr. Das does not need an introduction to the students of art history and history lovers. Ashok Kumar Das was the former director, Maharaja Sawai Mansingh II Museum, Jaipur. He was also a senior visiting fellow at the Victoria and Albert Museum, London, a fellow of Jawaharlal Nehru Scholarship, Andrew Mellon Fellowship at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Satyajit Ray Chair, Kalabhavan Vishwabharati Shantiniketan, and he was also awarded the prestigious Tagore Fellowship at the Indian Museum, Kolkata. Dr. Das is associated with many prestigious institutions in India and abroad. The main areas of his research and publication are Mughal and Rajasthani art and culture, museology, and history, on which he has published more than 60 books, portfolios, research papers, popular articles, and book reviews in leading Indian and foreign art journals. Today, Dr. Das is going to speak on a very unique and interesting topic which he titled as In Relief and in Round Sculptural Works at the Mughal Court. I hope you will enjoy Dr. Ashok Kumar Das' presentation. Now over to Dr. Ashok Kumar Das. Thank you.
Friends, this is the first of time when I'm speaking without facing an audience. But I know ultimately due to technological advancement, I would face a bigger audience, but without much interaction. Well, this makes a very big difference to me because I'm accustomed to that for a long time. I'm very much thankful to the authorities of the Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya, as well as to Debangana Desai for inviting me to deliver the third Debangana Desai Endowment Lecture. I have selected a subject which is rather uncommon. I will speak on the sculptural works at the Mughal court. Initially, it seems that the words are not in keeping with one another. How can an Islamic court encourage making of sculptures? Because sculpturing humans and animals in the round is considered as the most reprehensible form of breaking Islamic injunctions against making images. Yet the Mughal emperors apparently ignored this and commissioned three-dimensional statues and objects in considerable numbers, and in various materials, used them with great pride. I deliberately selected this subject to tell my audience and show them in large number, and great variety of sculpted objects were fashioned at the Mughal court, much of which has remained unnoticed and unknown. The earliest and perhaps the most important examples of life-size three-dimensional statues made during Mughal rule was the making of the images of the Rajput heroes Jayamalla and Patta, whose courage and valor during Akbar's siege of Chittor in 1568 impressed him so much that he ordered for their statues made and displayed before one of the principal gateways of his principal residential and official fort, the Agra fort. This happened when the construction of the fort was nearing completion in 1568 and 69. Though the specific date of the order issued by the emperor or the time of their installation are not known, they were found there by Father Antoni Montserrat when he visited Akbar's court as a member of the first Jesuit mission in 1580. He noted, rather in some detail, that in front of the gateway are statues of two petty kings when Zeladdin, that is Akbar, himself shot with his own musket. These are seated on life-size statues of elephants on which the kings used to ride when they were alive. The statues serve both as trophies of the king's prowess as well as monuments of his military victories. This is from the commentary of Father Montserrat. There are many interpretations of this path-breaking decision of the Mughal emperor. However, one thing is clear, that Akbar was impressed by their heroism and recognized it by ordering their statues to be made and displayed at a prominent location. These black marble life-size elephants with riders enjoyed great fame as they were depicted in a painting of the Akbarnama. Now here you could see that the elephants are very prominently displayed. They are standing their full size, and there is the Jayamalla and Patta, both of them with the mahouts. And this particular painting was painted around 1604 and part of the Akbarnama in the Chester Beatty Library, in the Victoria and Albert Museum, London. Now, we have another very important corroboration from another source. This additional information about these statues that are found in a Jain Vigyapti Patra, which was written and illustrated by the Patishahi Chitrakar, that is the imperial painter, Shalibahana. Issued at the time of Jahangir in 1610. Now, the Jains were trying their best to get some concession from the Mughal emperor, and Jahangir ultimately issued a farman in 1610, which the resident Jain scholars were sending to their principals in Kathiawar. This Vigyapti Patra is a long scroll preserved, is a very important document and preserved in the LD Museum in Ahmedabad. The Vigyapti Patra was first published by Hiranand Shastri, and later on by other scholars also. But this particular image is from an article by Pramod Chandra, because unfortunately I could not get a visual from the original due to paucity of time and due to the prevailing COVID situation. In any case, this particular illustration is very important for two reasons. First of all, it comes from a dated evidence, and that the date is in the Jahangir's reign in 1610. And secondly, it clearly shows the script. In script, this is the figure of Patta and this is the figure of Jaimal, which are labeled here. And also the gate, that Hathia pole, that is the elephant gate of Agra fort. So we have, first of all, the evidence of Father Montserrat in 1580, and now from Jahangir's time it is 1610. Then after Jahangir, when Shah Jahan built the Lal Killa at Shahjahanabad in Delhi, he removed these large life-size elephant sculptures with their riders to Delhi and installed them in the south gate that is known as Delhi Gate. This particular fact is recorded, and also we know from other contemporary sources, especially, from the evidence of François Bernier and others. Now, these were there in front of the south gate of the Lal Killa till Aurangzeb's accession. But after Aurangzeb's accession, he did not like the idea of having figural sculpture decorating one of the main entrances of the fort. So they were ordered to be destroyed and buried. And this particular fact is also recorded. And this happened sometimes after 1666. After that, these images remain untraced until the middle of the 19th century, when, while cleaning some areas of the Lal Killa, Sir Alexander Cunningham, the Director General of Archaeological Survey of India, was told about the discovery of broken fragments of big red black marble elephants and also some figures. Now these were painstakingly assembled. Once it was not done correctly because not all the pieces were found, but ultimately they were found and the elephants were rebuilt and reinstalled there, but not the figures of Jaimal and Patta. But ultimately, these two heads were traced, kept in the museum, and they are believed to be of Jaimal and Patta. These are the two heads. They are taken from the book, from the catalog by Michael Brand and John Lowry, because I myself could never get to see them. But this is the only remain of those glorious statues in sandstone made during Akbar's time. There are no other pictures of them. So this is a very important evidence and a very important information. First of all, the Battle of Chittor, the valor shown by these Rajput heroes, and how they impressed Akbar, and how he, breaking all injunctions, ordered for the fashioning of two life-size statues placed on two life-size elephants, and also displayed in the outside the gate of one of his principal gateways of Agra fort. Now, this is not the only instance. There are other instances also when he and also his successors followed the convention. That credit goes to Emperor Jahangir. Jahangir was stationed in Ajmer for more than 3 years, because his ambition was to subjugate the important Rajput state of Mewar. After initial failures, he finally selected his young son, Shahzada Sultan Khurram, the later Shah Jahan, with a big army to invade Mewar and annex it to the Mughal Empire. Now, in 1616, Khurram achieved some success because he persuaded Rana Amar Singh of Mewar to come to the Mughal camp and offer his submission. Now, that particular episode is illustrated in a beautiful painting now preserved in the Victoria and Albert Museum, which was painted by Nanha. That the subjugation of the Rana. And that was heralded as a great victory by Jahangir. And there were celebrations after celebrations. But while doing that, one day, he notes in his autobiography, the Tuzuk-i Jahangiri, the fact that this subjugation should be properly commemorated. So he wrote in his diary, the Tuzuk, that I had ordered skilled stone cutters to sculpt life-size likenesses of the Rana, that is Amar Singh, and his son Karan Singh in marble. On August 30, 1616, he writes that today they were completed and shown to me. And he writes, I ordered them taken to Agra and set up in the garden beneath the Jharoka-e-Darshan. That is one of the principal gateways facing east, facing the Jamuna River, where Jahangir used to appear before the onlookers every morning. So there cannot be a more prominent place. So like his father, who ordered the figures of statues of Jaimal and Patta, Jahangir also got images made of Rana Amar Singh and Karan Singh. Unfortunately, these two images have not yet been traced. There is one theory, and there is some confusion also, that amongst the debris in the Red Fort that were discovered during the middle of the 19th century by the Archaeological Survey of India, there were more than 2 torsos or 2 figures. But whether they belong or they show the kings as well as the mahouts, because each figure, as you have seen, had 2 figures. Or they belong to these 2 rulers, we don't know, because we are not sure. There is no specific information when Shah Jahan took away not only the figures of Jaimal and Patta, but also these 2 figures. But there is one information from a later source that Aurangzeb got those 2 figures in Agra that were left behind by Shah Jahan, removed to the garden facing the Jamuna at Agra Fort. But nothing has been found. So there is no trace so far of the images, the marble images of Maharaj Rana Amar Singh and his son Karan Singh. Anyway, I will show you 2 more. This is a 1875 photograph kept in the British Library, taken by Joseph Degler, which shows the 2 statues. Now, whether they most likely these are the 2 statues of the mahouts of Jaimal and Patta's elephants, but we are not sure. And tragically, we have no clue, where these 2 figures are at present. I am showing this from an 1875 photograph. So this is one lacuna, that these important evidences of have not been properly maintained or studied. Now, taking a cue from those elephant gates, we find that Akbar as well as Jahangir decorated most of their gates with elephants. And there are Hathia pole or elephant gates not only in Agra, but also this particular one is from Fatehpur Sikri. And this particular illustration is from a miniature of the Akbarnama, the earlier one, which is in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Now here you could see that they do not have any particular, rider. They are only elephants. And their trunks are connected in such a way as one scholar has noted that as if they represent something that has been copied from a figure of Gajalakshmi. Nevertheless, these are two life-size elephants, and such three-dimensional objects were made in quite a few instances, as we find in Fatehpur Sikri, in Agra, and also there is a reference that Jahangir got, these made at the palace at Mandu, where he stayed briefly during, on his way and back from Ajmer to Gujarat. Now, this is a picture of one of the elephant gates as it stands now. Now, we come to, the figures of not human beings. There are, but I will show you later, but also all of animals. Now, the Mughals were great lovers of animal. From the time of Babur, we find that they not only took great care of the horses and the elephants because they were absolutely indispensable for day-to-day life, as well as for traveling, for going to shikar, for in the battlefield. So there was a huge contingent of elephants and constant importation of high quality, hybrid horses in the Mughal establishment in Agra, Fatehpur Sikri, Lahore, and Delhi. Now, this particular one is quite clear, is a favorite horse. And this one is can be, even now found, erected within the compound of Khwaja Kapur's mosque at a place called Guru Ki Tal near Sikandra in Agra. Now, there is no inscription and we don't have any other contemporary information about that. But there is a very strong popular belief, popular story that this particular horse was Akbar's favorite horse. And Akbar, while traveling in a hurry, in a great haste, from all the way from Delhi to Agra, this overworked horse suddenly fell down and died at that particular spot, which is very close to Sikandra, where Akbar was finally, is buried. Now, in Khwaja Kapur's compound, this life-size figure of a royal horse is still found. And stylistically, it shows Mughal element of early 17th century, or around 1600. Now, there is also another horse, figure of horse, within the compound of Agra Fort, which is connected with Raja Amar Singh of Nagaur. Now, this one is only partially preserved, but the photograph is not very good, but it's definitely, much better workmanship than what you could see from this one. Now, after that, we find, I have just told you that how elephants played a leading part in at the Mughal court. There are numerous references of elephants. The elephants had great name. There were elephant fights. There were elephant capture, and there are images of elephant trapping by Akbar. There are individual images, not one, but many, many. But these are three-dimensional, not three-dimensional, but two-dimensional paintings and drawings. There is a whole lot of it. And not only Akbar or Jahangir, but also their successors. And so each of these elephants had their name, their special mahut, as well as their special establishment and allotments. And uh, Abul Fazl has devoted an entire chapter on them. Now, there is only one good reference of an elephant that was being fashioned out of a living rock during Akbar's time. That was precisely in 1602 or 3, later part of 1602 or 3, when Akbar was trying, in his last battle to annex Khandesh with its capital at Burhanpur, that was being ruled by the Faruqis. So after a long siege, someone pointed out to Akbar that it is said that the sage Burhan al-Din, whose followers the Faruqis were, told them that if that large boulder that juts out from the bed of river Tapti flowing by the city's side would be converted into an elephant, so that would herald the end of the Faruqi dynasty. So Akbar, heard that story and immediately told his skilled stone cutters, or sangtarases as they are known, to fashion the image of an elephant there on the bed of the river Tapti. Now that elephant is still there, though in a damaged state. And, that it was built during the beginning of the 17th century, there is no doubt about it, because it was noticed by Finch while passing by Burhanpur in 1610. And he was surprised to find the very lively quality of that elephant. But later on, the elephant was, converted into a Vahana, or a form of Ganesha, and it's still being worshipped there in Burhanpur. So that is the only reference of a full-size elephant carved out of living rock on the bed of the river Tapti outside Burhanpur fort. But in Jahangir's time, we have several references. The first one actually, refers to a journey that Jahangir was making from Agra to Kabul via Delhi and Lahore. So while crossing the river Indus, at a place called, just a second, called Basawal, he noticed a large boulder or white rock jutting out, just on the flow of the river. And he thought that it would be a good idea to carve out an elephant out of it, a life-size elephant. And immediately he ordered his skilled stone cutters to fashion it. And they took, within a short time, they were able to get it converted into a large statue of an elephant in white stone. Now, he immediately instructed his companions to tell the most eminent calligrapher of the time, Mullah Hussain Kashmiri Zareen Kalam, to carve out a hemistice that gives the date of the activity. That was 1607. Unfortunately, the elephant could not be traced. Whether it has got destroyed or remain untraced, we don't know. But since it was the inscription is mentioned, and Jahangir himself, you know, left a note giving these details that I have just told you, there is no doubt about that the elephant figure was made there, and it was a life-size figure. The next one was carved during, his brief stay at Ajmer. Not brief, long stay at Ajmer. And there he found a large boulder of granite not very far from his residence, and also not very far from the shrine of Khaja Khaja Muinuddin Chishti. So this was converted into the figure of an elephant, and again accompanied with an inscription which gives the date of 1617. Now this particular elephant is still there, though in a damaged state, but not under the control of the archaeological survey. So it's in private hand, and they are worshipping it as Lord Ganesha. And I only found a very sort of rough sketch that was published, almost 100 years back in Modern Review. But no other illustration. I myself tried to visit the place, but since it was under private control and we were not given any access, the question of taking any photograph didn't arise. But the inscription is there, and the inscription is sort of carved in a kind of relief. And there it specifically mentions that it's the image of the elephant called Balahasti. And the place is now called Hathi Bhata, which is not very far from the Ajmer GPO. And how I wish, to visit the place and at least try to get a good picture, because it's an inscribed piece and it's a very rare one. Now then, while during his stay in Ajmer, he got also, not directly by him, but one of his superintendent of the elephant stable, he was given the title Gajahast Khan. The word Gaja and Hast, these are, Sanskrit words. But this was the title given to the superintendent by the emperor. So Gajahast Khan apparently belonged to this place. And there is a place about a few kilometers away from Ajmer, and the place is called Bhikaji Ki Baoli in Gangwana. There, the Gajahast Khan actually, built and donated a large baoli, because this is a very dry place and there is a constant need for water. And this baoli, or the step well, is quite elaborate. It's still there and still in a working condition. But at one place of the baoli, there was a headstone on which there was a large relief sculpture of an elephant, along with the Ankusha and the Pasha. So to denote, the close connection of the man who built this baoli with elephants. And the date, as I mentioned, is 1024 Hijri, that is 1615. Now, there is another, example of an elephant, but unfortunately there is no trace of it that was built, near Ajmer. But later on, towards the end of his reign, during one of his last visits from Lahore to Kashmir, when he was passing by Nowshera, Jahangir noticed, that they were resting in a resting place in the Pir Panjal Hills at a place near a mountain pass called Hathinala. There, he noticed that there are two large boulders, and he instructed his men to convert them into elephants. And a big male and a female elephant were carved out of those boulders. Now, you could see how lively, these are. This is the back view of the same elephant, and this is from the front. It had the figure of the mahout also, but it's broken now. And now the place is not very far from the line of actual control between India and Pakistan. So it's not very easy to go there and get photographs. But they are still standing, not in their full glory because they are damaged, but still one can easily admire the high quality of craftsmanship. Now the inscription gives two very interesting information. And it mentions that, that the life-size sculpture of a male elephant shaped out of the living rock, harnessed with chains and ropes, and with fragments of a mahout lying on a platform at Hatinala Pass. The inscription is dated 1035, that is 1625, and the name of the elephant, this particular male elephant, is written as Bali Gaj. And the name of the sculptor, this is an extremely rare example where you know the name of the sculptor as Manhal. From the name, Ebakok assumes that he perhaps was a well-known Hindu sculptor. Now we know from Akbar's time that there were sculptors in the employment of the Mughal at the Mughal court, because there were all the time construction activities were going on, in some part or the other, and new pavilions, new buildings, new mausolea, etc. were being built. But we find amongst the painters of the Akbarnama one name, the name of Khaiman Sang Taras. Now this word Sang Taras actually means a sculptor. So there were people, and there is no reason why there won't be, but here of course this man was working as an assistant to a Mughal master, as a painter. So he was both a painter as well as a sculptor. Now, apart from that, we have also other references, but this particular name specifically mentioned in an inscription that was written by the calligrapher Abdul Ghaffar. And the date is, as I mentioned, 1625, and the place is near Rajouri and at the foot of the Pir Panjal hill. Now, as I just mentioned, that there were lots of elephant figures that one finds, along with figures of other birds and animals in high relief. These are not full-scale sculpture in the round, but nevertheless, they were animal figures. And, making of animal figures was a taboo, but this taboo was definitely not followed by the Mughal emperors. So here we have got peacocks as well as elephants, and not one. But this particular panel is from the main principal gateway of the Akbar's mausoleum at Sikandra. That was completed around 1610. And this particular one was, is in the Victoria and Albert Museum. It was from a broken building, and it shows an elephant, a royal one, as it has the jewel. It's, it's ornamented, and it also had its mahout, the Mahabat. And here you find, that it's carrying a kind of lotus. Now, these type of architectural, sculpture in the round used as architectural element is found in all Mughal palaces in Agra and in Fatehpur Sikri, in Lahore, as well as in Delhi. But And there are also numerous examples of sculpted panels in other buildings, especially the buildings connected with Khurram and the Empress Noor Jahan. And in Philaur district, the place called Noor Mahal, Sarai Noor Mahal, there are wonderful high relief sculptures showing not only birds and animals, but also human figures as decorative elements on the gateway. Now, this is a wonderful example found in the Red Fort. This is made of metal, brass, but you could see how wonderfully these are fashioned by skilled craftsmen at the Mughal court. And there were obviously numerous examples like that that have not survived. This one is still to be found in the Red Fort. Now, before moving to other subjects, I must also tell you that there were sculptures of elephants of various sizes that were used in the at the Mughal court. Now, this particular painting is from the Padshah-Nama and now in the Bodleian Library in Oxford. And here we find that Shah Jahan is receiving his son Shuja, showing Chauri bearers. These two of them are Chauri and Morsal. No, this is Morsal and this is Chauri, are standing on two large elephant statues. And we have several examples of that. And not only from the Padshah-Nama, but also from other royal manuscripts. And these are usually made of wood or metal covered with gold leaf or gold plates. Now this one is of particular interest because the painting is obviously formed a part of the Jahangirnama. And this one is preserved in the Keir collection at Richmond. Now it shows and it gives evidence of some very important, aspects of it. It shows Emperor Jahangir. Unfortunately, the face was damaged and now it's retouched, not very well. But he is seated on a throne which is said to be of a new design fashioned by a European goldsmith. And fortunately, we know his name and we know, we have some very important additional information about him and his activities through some of the letters that he wrote, back home. His name is Augustine of Bordeaux or Augusta. Now, Emperor Jahangir employed him and he was so satisfied with his work and his craftsmanship that he gave him the lofty title of Honarmand, the most capable one. And here is Augusta wrote in his letter that I am now busy in fashioning a very important golden throne for the emperor, which was bedecked and embellished with numerous jewels. Now this one he mentions is, his legs are made of crouching lions and the canopy is resting on 12 baluster columns that are made of gold with enameling and encrusted with jewels. Now here you would find some of European motifs as well. And the barrel shape is also very uncommon. So we have, so many new aspects, and Jahangir was very proud that he, along with his son, they introduced many new designs. Now we are moving, from structural sculptures to decorative ones. In this particular this particular example is very notable because it can be precisely dated in 1618 or 19 when uh, Augustin was able to complete and deliver the throne, and he took many months to complete it. And he has given a full account of how many kilograms of silver were used for fashioning out these lions and to cover them with gold seats. All the details have been furnished. Now, speaking of lions, we come across two very large and extremely heavy, more than 50 kilograms each, metal sculptures of, the forepart of two lions. Now, these were collected by an Austrian uh, collector from Japan. And he was told that they came from China. And he actually was more interested in Chinese things than Mughal. But stylistically, these particular lions do not belong to the Chinese tradition, but they look more Mughal. These were discovered by Kerry Welch while visiting the museum at Cologne, the East Asiatic Museum, Ostasiatische Kunstmuseum in Cologne. And there, these were exhibited in the 85 exhibition of Fatehpur Sikri in Harvard. And the catalog was, it was curated by Michael Brandt and Glenn Lowry. And later on, Kerry Wells wrote also a paper in the Pupul Dayakar felicitation volume on this pair of lions. Now they speculated that these lions were used as finials used in prows of the royal boats, like this one, as you could see. And this particular painting is from the Akbarnama of the second Akbarnama, that is around 1604. Most of parts of which are distributed between the British Library and the Chester Beatty Library. So, I mean, those large, huge, three-dimensional metal sculptures may at one stage have formed part of the, decorative elements of the large boats, royal boats. But besides that, there were other uses of such dimension, as for example, finials of thrones. I will show you one later on. And then there are also, the standards that used to be carried by the trail of attendants following or preceding the emperor. So like that, there are numerous examples where three-dimensional sculptures of various metal or wood or other materials were used in different forms. There is also another example. This one is from the Dastan Amir Hamza. And here, not one, but there are many. And you could see that this is made of metal and fixed on it. Now we come to the story of the making of a very important sculpture. That is the sculpture, the statue of a black buck. Now Jahangir, like his fathers and his forefathers, very fond of shikar. And shikar, there were various, kinds of and forms of shikar, and some were done with decoy animals, and some with, hunting dogs, trained cheetahs, and trained black bucks. And the black bucks are very sort of pretty animal, and you know, they can be trained quite easily, and they become very pet, very devoted to the keeper or to the owner. Now, Jahangir was traveling from uh, Agra to Delhi, Agra to Lahore, and at that time, these journeys were often very leisurely. They took ages together. Sometimes, for uh, they halted for hunting, and the hunting went on for 2 days, 3 days, sometimes even stretched to even more than that. Now, outside Lahore, there is a place called Sheikhpura, and that was one of the principal hunting grounds of the Mughals. So while Jahangir had a very favorite black buck, very pet one, and Jahangir was very, I shouldn't say enamored, but fond of this particular one, and it was named Mansha Raj. Now, Mansha Raj, Jahangir has mentioned in his autobiography, was very capable of not only fighting with pet uh, animals in animal fights, but also in capturing wild ones. But it suddenly died at that particular place. And Jahangir was grief stricken, and he immediately ordered three things. First of all, there would be a replica, a life-size replica of the black buck made of stone. Then it would be placed on the grave, and on that grave, there would be an inscribed tablet, inscription, uh, that gives the date 1607, and the inscription was written again by Mullah Hussain Kashmiri Zareen Kalam. And a large minar was erected to commemorate his favorite, the death of his favorite black buck, Mansha Raj. Now the minar is still standing. The place has further developed during Jahangir's time and later on during Shah Jahan's time as a hunting resort with large reservoirs, pools, and chabutaras and baradwaris, etc. The place is still very popular, and many people, visit it. They come from Lahore because it's only about 80 kilometers from Lahore. But there was no trace of that sculpture. But in 1959, uh, when the Archaeological Survey of Pakistan was uh, repairing the monuments and developing the place, they found, at a depth of about 3 meters, the head of an antelope. This one. So this is, taken from the published report by Ahmad Nabi Khan, who was the digger. But I haven't been able to find a better photograph, and I don't know where this particular sculpture is kept, whether in a museum or in some godown of the survey, I don't know. But nevertheless, it's an important evidence. The effigy, or a full three-dimensional sculpture made of a pet animal, installed and commemorated by building such a lofty pillar. This is not a very usual incident. Now, there are many, I have seen at least 24 pictures of black bucks. Now, this particular one, the tether one, is a very majestic animal that is kept in the Maharaja Sawai Mansingh Museum in Jaipur. Now, the picture is the drawing, it's a drawing, it's not inscribed, but at its back, there is an inscription which ascribes it to Ustad Mansur. The word Ustad is not written, it's written by Mansur. And there are numerous librarians' notes and official seals to show the importance of the piece. So I think, in my uh, assessment, this can be of the picture of the tethered, of the black buck Mansa Raj. Now, recently, a friend of mine, Sujit Das, sent me this wonderful picture of a limestone hunting dog, Saluki dog, which is on display at the Allahabad Museum. Now, stylistically, it belongs to the Mughal era, and it can be confidently given a date of 17th century. Now, we have numerous references of dogs being imported from Europe and also in other parts of the world for hunting. And there are many accounts of Saluki hounds, but later on the Saluki hounds became very popular, and we have got pictures of Saluki hound made in different courts of, especially of Mewar, Ganirao, Devgarh, etc. But this particular one, we don't know. I'm trying to find out that if it was found within the precincts of the fort of Allahabad or the Khosrow Bagh, then we can confidently, attribute it to to the days of Salim's stay uh, at Allahabad, because we have found many other objects, made there during Salim's stay between 1600 and 1605. Now we come to the second part of the presentation, and this deals with two different aspects. One is the European impact, and the second one is also, how three-dimensional objects were made as court accoutrements as well as also as, uh, weapons to decorate the weapons and others. These are, in most instances, smaller objects, to be carried by hand and decorative art objects. They are nevertheless, the sculptural quality is absolutely spellbinding, fantastic, as you would see. And in some cases, we don't know the specific names, but we have records of names of some very eminent uh, makers, especially Jahangir gives the name of Puran and Kalyan. And one of them was given the title Ajaib Dast, wonderful hand, as Mansur was given the title, Nadirul Zaman, the wonder of the age. And they were given very rich presents because they did objects, smaller objects, sword handles, handles of knives and other things for the emperor. But their quality was absolutely spellbinding, impeccable. Now, apart from that, the first category, as I mentioned, are with the arrival of the Europeans and with the permission given by Emperor Akbar to the Jesuits to build a chapel in Agra near the fort, and also in Fatehpur Sikri, almost within the royal residential quarters, just outside the royal residential quarters in public areas. There were, presence of many stone, ivory, and metal sculptures of religious figures, especially of Virgin Mary and the Christ. Now, this particular marble statue of the Virgin was found at a site in the site of the old chapel at Agra Fort in about 100 years back. And it was reinstalled in the old in the old cathedral at Agra, where they can still be viewed. Now, this is interesting because it has got, the figure has got certain elements which are not completely European. That is, she is standing on a kind of double lotus mount. I mean, figures on mounts are usually worshipping figures. And also the folds of the drapery and others are very interesting and found in uh, Mughal paintings in the works of painters like Bashawan and others. Now, there is an account of the Jesuits, and also there is an account by Hawkins where he says that Jahangir used to pray at a place near a table on which are placed the figures of the Virgin and Christ. Now, we don't know that whether a figure like this were placed there, but he was quite emphatic. But we have no idea whether he writes it, from hearsay or he himself was witness to that. We don't know. But it's a fact. The Jesuits have written, Sir Thomas Roe has written, and other Western travelers who passed through the Mughal empire during these years have written how eager Prince Salim and later on Jahangir was to get replicas of the figures or statues brought by the Europeans at the Mughal court, made for his own use. So there are evidences of figures made in ivory, in metal. So these were, in most instances, small pieces, and we have several of them available for study. Now, this particular one was originally in a private collection, perhaps for Stuart Cary Welch. It's made of soft marble or alabaster, and it's a small figure. It shows Salome receives the head of Saint John the Baptist after the Feast of Herod. Now, this is a purely European subject based on a woodcut, that has been identified coming from Germany and dated in around 1570. So how this became a subject copied by the Mughals and became a part of their holding is very interesting, that such a subject became popular. Then we come across a lovely ivory piece. Now, this particular ivory is preserved in the British Museum. And I happened to come across it and publish it for the first time because it was collected only in 1959. And I was fortunate in looking at it within 5 years. And at once I thought that this has got some bearing with a well-known, drawing that was published at about that time by Richard Ettinghausen. This is a detail from a Jahangirnama page containing calligraphic details, and it has got these lovely drawings in light color in gray, black, and gold. Now it shows the picture of young Christ as the mariner. And it was made because this particular one has got, it's not visible here clearly, that it was the engraving, it was made after an engraving made at Rome in 1580. So obviously that particular engraving reached the Mughal court of Akbar during the course of the visits of these other Jesuit missions, the second one in 1585 and the third one in 1595, that stayed on for many years. So here we have got a Mughal version of the engraving in a drawing on the Hashia or the margin of a page of the Jahangirnama at the Friar Gallery. And here we have got an ivory replica made for the emperor, uh, that is now in the British Library. Now this is followed by a very interesting object, a knife or curd with a handle and a pommel, made of nephrite jade. Now this has got, the curd has got an inscription which, connects it with Sahib Pirani Shani, that is the title of Emperor Shah Jahan. But the head, with the curved knife is extremely interesting because it shows a figure who is wearing a ruff, indicating, an aristocratic figure, not necessarily a figure of of a religious one, because previously it was thought as a figure of a boy Christ. And then it has got this very funny snail shell carl, as you could see here in this particular painting. And this is now in the collection of Sheikh Ahmad bin Abdullah Al Thani collection. This is followed by an extremely interesting picture of a thumb ring, a very small object. It's a ring of the, right toe, normally used by the archer. It's a archer's ring. Now, this is made of a material which was much admired at the Mughal court, walrus or narwhal ivory. Now, ivory is very common in India, so there was no question you could get any number of ivories. But narwhal ivory was something which was rare, and it used to come from Central Asia or from Iran, where it was traded. Jahangir was mad, after this, and he really, became elated when he was presented with narwhal ivories. And there are many instances in the Tuzuki Jahangiri when he shows his happiness in receiving gifts of narwhal ivory. And then he passed those on to his expert carvers, ivory carvers, and jewelers to fashion objects out of that. Now, this particular one is in the collection of the Maharaja Sawai Man Singh Second Museum in Jaipur. When I went there way back in 1972, I noticed it among with, various other thumb rings, all kept in a kind of mala, kind of garland shape. And then I noticed that this has got a very unique kind of decoration. The figure, is a kind of religious figure, and then the figure of Virgin Mary, a lovely one, obviously following an Italian model. And then there are two, I don't have the details here now, two winged angels on two sides. And mind you, the object is just a ring. So it's a very tiny piece of object, but the quality of craftsmanship you can easily admire from these detailed photographs. They're marvelous. So I published in, way back in the 1980s in an article in Marg, and later on in a recent publication, Elgood has given it a much longer space and made many speculations about its origin. But whatever it may be, I'm sure this was fashioned sometimes during Jahangir's time, because all these figures have got, especially the winged figures and others, have got close similarity with the figures of flying angels that we find at the Kala Burj in Lahore Fort, whose dates are well known, or also in the Noor Manzil, Noor Afsan garden in Agra that was built for Noor Jahan. Now, during the 1618, after, during his travel to Ajmer, Gujarat, Mandu, and other places after that, we find that there was a steady, stream of European craftsmen coming to the Mughal court. Some of them found employment. And then at that point of time, we also find that the, the rising fortune of Prince Shah Jahan, Prince Khurram, who was given the title Shah Jahan. And both Shah Jahan and the Queen, Noor Jahan, they were great designers. Both of them have innovated many new designs in the field of textiles, in carpets, in architectural embellishments, in the decorative arts, jewelry, wood carving, everything, in every aspect of it. And that's a subject which needs to be, uh, studied in fuller detail. I am sure some younger scholars should take it up, because there are many references both in the Tuzukas and also in the Padsanama, and there are many examples that are still surviving in various parts of the empire. Now, apart from that, we have 4 objects, smaller objects. These are jewelries. This is a pendant. It shows Shah Jahan, hunting lion, made of sardonyx. And the outer, place is, of course, very European looking, made of silver, gilt silver, enameled gold setting. And the piece is in the collection of the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. But there are quite a few figures of agates, sardonyx, and other semi-precious stones carved into such small objects and used as medals or pendants or turban ornaments. Now, this is a absolutely wonderful, portrait bust of Shah Jahan. Originally, some people thought that it was the work of a visiting European craftsman. But it seems quite possible, because there are elements in which, we find that it was a very beautifully rendered object by the numerous craftsmen employed by Shah Jahan. So this can be dated around the middle of his reign, around 1650. And this is made of alabaster with polychrome. As you could see, there are touches of gold, and it's in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. This is followed by another tiny sardonyx portrait of Shah Jahan. Then there he is aged at about 45. And Robert Skelton thought that it was probably, fashioned by a European lapidary working at the court. We are not sure because agates, are available in plenty in India, and agates were used for decorative and ornaments and jewelry in Indian art right from the time of the Indus Valley civilization. So there is no reason why, it should be attributed to a European. It can jolly well be the work of a Mughal craftsman like Puran and Kalyan, who were for Shah Jahan. Now this one is in the Kuwait National Museum. It came to the market, I don't know from where, in the art market in the 1980s. So this one is made of layered agate, white on very pinkish tan. And this is in the collection, in the Al-Saba collection at the Kuwait National Museum. Now we come to the last phase, where we find a lot of objects made of jade, ivory, and rock crystal, and also, of course, of gold and silver. But I'm putting more emphasis on these objects. Now, this particular one is a fairly large object, quite heavy, perhaps the largest, jade objects made in the Mughal court, at the Mughal court. Now, this is a terrapin, or a river one, found normally in the Ganga, and near the Sangam, the Allahabad Fort. They are still to be found there, this kind of river tortoise, and called terrapin. And this particular one was discovered while cleaning a tank within the fort of Allahabad in about 100 years back. No, or 200 years back. And then it ultimately found its way to the British Museum, where it's being proudly exhibited now. But there is no inscription, and there is no other way to connect it with the Mughal court, excepting its fine spot, and accepting the fact that jade is an extremely valuable material. It's an extremely hard material, not very easy to cut, and the technique of jade carving was mastered at the Mughal court. So there is every reason that this was done in the early 17th century, perhaps during the stay of Jahangir. But the only lacuna is that it's not mentioned anywhere in Jahangir's autobiography. Now, this is followed by one of the finest, most exquisitely carved, white nephrite jade ever found. Now, this is known as the Shah Jahan Cup, and it's kept proudly displayed in the Victoria and Albert Museum. This is one of sort of great masterpieces, one can say. It shows a markhor or a kind of heel goat, and the organic shape is like a Karela. And this type, but this one is very European. So there is a combination of Europe, traditional Indian, as well as typically Mughal. And this has been studied in detail by various scholars, especially by Robert Skelton. And definitely it can be considered as a great masterpiece of sculptural art and fashioned at the Mughal court. Now comes, two very interesting knife handles. This one is jeweled, of a goat head, rather rare, of a curved knife, small knife, usually carried by aristocratic figures, by the kings and princes. This is in the Al Sabah collection at Kuwait, which is full of, there are many, large number of such jade, ivory, metal, and other court accoutrements. This one is a very rare one, again made of walrus ivory. And this lion head is not a big piece. And this can also be dated in the second quarter of the 18th century, when there were reports of many walrus ivories reaching Jahangir's court. This one is from the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and it can be dated around 1660, because this belongs to the knife that has an inscription connecting it to Alamgir, Aurangzeb. And this one is another masterpiece in the Metropolitan Museum of a Nilgai. Beautiful nephrite jade of a Nilgai. This is made of crystal, and you could see the high quality of the craftsmanship there, with gold inlay and then metal, some, I think, semi-precious stone. And I come to the sort of last bit. This is the jeweled bar of enamel gold, and you could see the workmanship there. It's exquisitely, made. It's a a rather important piece. And we find that during the time of Shah Jahan, I mean, the trend started from the later decade of Jahangir's reign with Augustin of Bordeaux. But then we find a large number of precious objects fashioned out of precious stones with enameling and, with very many mixed technique. Now, this particular bird is in the Kuwait collection, and it can be connected. I have just deliberately shown this particular image to show, how these smaller three-dimensional objects used as finials of thrones, golden thrones were fashioned. They were they were enameled and set with precious stones. And there was, of course, the trend starts from Akbar's time and continued by Jahangir, because there is a picture of a throne, picture of a young Jahangir seated on a throne in the Leningrad album. So in that way, we come across a large body of sculptured materials and that defy the Islamic injunction. Thank you.